Getting around a new city can be one of the most stressful parts of traveling, especially when you're trying to stick to a budget. Do you take a taxi? Do you use a ride-sharing app? Or do you brave the public transportation system? Today, we're going to break down the real costs of these three transportation options and help you decide which one is best for your wallet. I've used all three extensively while traveling around the world, and I'm going to share my honest analysis of the pros and cons of each. So, if you're tired of overpaying for transportation, you're in the right place. Let's start with public transportation. This includes buses, trains, metros, and trams. Public transportation is almost always the cheapest option, and it's the one I recommend for budget travelers. In many cities, you can get a monthly pass that will give you unlimited travel on all public transportation for a set price. This is a fantastic deal, especially if you're planning on exploring the city extensively. I once bought a monthly metro pass in Barcelona for around €50, and I used it to explore the entire city. It worked out to be incredibly cheap when I divided the cost by the number of trips I took. The biggest advantage of public transportation is the cost. It's significantly cheaper than taxis or ride-sharing apps. In many parts of the world, a single bus or metro ride costs less than £1. Even in more expensive cities, it's rarely more than a few pounds per trip. Another advantage is that you get to experience the city like a local. You're sharing the same buses and trains as the people who live there, and you get a real sense of how the city works. However, public transportation does have some downsides. It can be confusing to navigate, especially if you don't speak the language. The buses and trains might be crowded and uncomfortable, particularly during rush hour. And sometimes, the routes are complicated, and it takes longer to get where you're going, compared to a direct taxi ride. I once spent an hour trying to get to a museum that was only a few kilometers away because I got on the wrong bus and had to backtrack. Now, let's talk about taxis. Taxis are a more convenient option than public transportation, but they're also more expensive. The cost of a taxi ride depends on the distance and the city you're in. In some cities, taxis are relatively affordable, while in others, they can be quite expensive. The biggest advantage of taxis is convenience. You don't have to worry about figuring out routes or waiting for a bus or train. You just get in, tell the driver where you want to go, and you're on your way. Taxis are also a good option if you're traveling late at night or if you're in an unfamiliar area where you're not sure about safety. They're also useful if you're traveling with luggage or if you have mobility issues that make it difficult to use public transportation. However, there are some significant downsides to taxis. First, there's the risk of getting ripped off. In many cities, taxi drivers will try to overcharge tourists, especially if they think you don't know the local prices. I once got charged 3 times the normal fare for a short taxi ride in Bangkok because I didn't know the going rate. Another downside is that taxis can be hard to find, especially during peak hours or in less touristy areas. And finally, taxis are not the most environmentally friendly option. Finally, let's talk about ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft. These apps have revolutionized transportation in many cities, and they offer a middle ground between public transportation and taxis. The cost is usually somewhere between public transportation and taxis, and you get the convenience of a direct ride without the risk of getting ripped off by a taxi driver. You can see the price before you book, and you can pay through the app, so there's no haggling involved. The biggest advantage of ride-sharing apps is the convenience and transparency. You know exactly how much you're going to pay before you get in the car, and you don't have to worry about getting lost or taking a roundabout route. Another advantage is that you can often get a discount if you're a new user or if you use a promo code. I've used ride-sharing apps to save money on transportation in many cities. However, ride-sharing apps do have some downsides. They're more expensive than public transportation, so if you're on a tight budget, they can add up quickly. They're also not available in all cities, and in some places, they're banned or heavily restricted. Additionally, during peak hours, the surge pricing can make them significantly more expensive. I once tried to book a ride during rush hour in New York, and the price was triple the normal rate. So, which one should you choose? The answer depends on your travel style and your budget. If you're on a tight budget and you don't mind navigating public transportation, then buses, trains, and metros are your best bet. They're the cheapest option, and they're a great way to experience the city like a local. If you're willing to spend a bit more for convenience and you want to avoid the hassle of figuring out public transportation, then ride-sharing apps are a good option. And if you're in a hurry and you don't mind paying a premium for convenience, then taxis are your best bet. Personally, I like to use a combination of all three. I'll use public transportation for most of my trips, but I'll splurge on a ride-sharing app or a taxi if I'm running late or if I'm traveling with a group of people. It's all about finding a balance that works for you and your budget. When I'm in a new city, I always take time to learn the public transportation system. I'll buy a map or look at the transit app on my phone, and I'll figure out which buses and trains go where. It might take a bit of time, but once you understand the system, it becomes much easier to navigate. And I always ask locals for advice. They're usually happy to help, and they often know shortcuts and tricks that you won't find in a guidebook. One more tip: always have a backup plan. If you're planning to use public transportation but you get lost or can't figure out the system, know that you can always take a taxi or a ride-sharing app as a backup. It's good to have options, especially when you're in a new city and feeling overwhelmed. I always make sure I know where the nearest taxi stand is, or that I have the ride-sharing app downloaded on my phone, just in case. Also, don't be afraid to ask for help. Locals are usually very friendly and happy to help tourists navigate their city. If you're confused about which bus to take or where to get off, just ask someone. Most people are more than willing to help, and you might even make a new friend in the process. I hope this video has helped you understand the real costs of different transportation options. What's your favorite way to get around a new city? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Travel with Mila for more budget travel tips and advice. Until next time, happy travels! Let's break down the costs even further. In a city like London, a single journey on the tube can cost around $2.50. A taxi for the same journey could easily be $15 to $20. A ride-sharing app might be somewhere in between, around $10 to $15. If you're making multiple journeys in a day, you can see how quickly the costs can add up. A daily cap on the tube is around £7.70, so you can make as many journeys as you like for that price. That's a huge saving compared to taking taxis or ride-sharing apps, but it's not just about the cost.